Morning, folks. This is the fuel pump out of that Magna. I was going to say Magna. The Shadow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it apart to check it out. I've never really seen the inside of one of these things. And let's see if we can figure out where this thing took a dump. I think I remember taking the one for the Magna apart. It had a leak. And it was the original one. And I ended up sealing up an end or something. And they can't be that much different. This is, of course, a Honda OEM made by whoever that is, Mitsubishi or something, I don't know. And so what I'll do is we'll try and just take it apart and see what it's got inside of it. I thought that'd be kind of fun. So I'm going to go ahead and get it out of the rubber here because I'm going to reuse that for the other fuel pump if I can. Get it out of here, that is. Try a little lube here. There's a little ridge in there. I see now there's a edge here, right, where this is clamped over on itself. Alright, take that screw out of the top. Yeah, there's some sort of vent on this. I guess because there's a diaphragm action of some sort, because the replacement pump has one too, that aftermarket one. That's pretty interesting how that works. Or maybe that's where the fuel comes out if the thing fails internally, to let you know. Kind of like a weep hole on a water pump. Oh, wow, there's your switch right there. Tell you what, alright, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to go ahead and depin this. Leave the pins connected, take the connector off the end of it. These are actually pretty easy if you've never done it before. I got these little tools for it, but a lot of times you can just use a very, very small screwdriver for it. I'll stick one of those in. I don't really need to maintain your orientation. Let's say I was able to fix this because I just match up the wires on the bike side to the orientation of the plug. The plug is only going to go one way because of the clip here, so that kind of clocks it and you just match the wires up. So otherwise you can mark it. These usually come in a big ring like this. You just got to find the right one. There's a retaining clip on these things that sticks out and grabs a feature of the inside of the plug to keep it from pulling backwards. Usually it's on the opposite side of the actual place where the pin goes on its mating side of the plug. So you just basically have to shove this in. Try a thinner one if I can find one. And these are not going. Those don't want to go. Gonna be it. And just take it off, and if I reuse this I can probably get them out at a later time and even force them out. I'm pretty sure I have these small ones. Can always repin it out and stick them back in, as long as the plastic's good. Yeah, that's a real pain in the keister. Those just do not want to go. And I think what we'll do is try to just push the grommet through it, and then get out of here. Yeah, it's one of these made into the wire, so leave that alone. So I guess this would be like the pressure switch that turns it off once it reaches a certain pressure. So you have some contacts here, looks like. Oh, here it is. That's just one contact. Okay, right there. Like a set of points. Oh, okay. Neato. So apparently, it's normally closed, of course, because it fires up as soon as it receives power. And then it'll release once it gets pressure. I'm wondering if part of this problem, if not all of it, is these little contacts right there. They look pretty dirty. Now, theoretically, if you have dirty contacts and it's making a bad connection, could you get some bouncing with that because it's trying to connect but it's not under load, and then like going on, off, on, off, on, off? I wonder if that's potentially a problem with it. So I think what I'll do first is I'll clean these, and then we'll hook it back up on the bike real quick on fuel lines and just put some power to it, even external power right there, and then we'll see if that does anything, because yeah, they look pretty crapped out here. You never know. Like I said, I've never done one of these before, but I suspect it's most likely inside here, which we can get apart just to look at, but I'm sure we're going to destroy it at that point. But let's just try that for the hell of it. Just some 800 grit. You know, I was thinking, remember, I don't know if you watched the other video, but when I put a video up that it lives and got this thing running and took it for a test ride, and that's when the pump took a dump. At the end of that video, I started rapping on this thing. I was able to get it to stop vibrating like that, you know, going brrr, and it was definitely generating pressure, because I could see that's a clear fuel line I have running out the pump up to the reducer, which goes up to the new fuel line I put into actually both carbs. So when I did that and it stopped doing that noise, I started the bike up. I did that off camera. And once the pressure relieved and it was ready to pump again, it did start pumping and then did this whole thing over again. So I'm not sure if it's just electrical or not. I don't have a high amount of confidence that it is, but you never know, huh? Worth a shot. These contacts don't look so healthy here. I don't have a points file, so you know, what's the point? Because you know, if this thing was operating, you know, it's got to draw obviously some current, so it's operating under load, and it has a failure point in the switching, and that's going to make it behave weird. And so that's my theory, at least. That's what the contacts look like. This is a stopper up here. That just limits the movement. And then this brass piece comes down and touches the arms here, which limits that movement down so it doesn't keep contacting the moving part. And then of course you have some sort of a mechanism in here which apparently reacts to the back pressure. I'm not going to pretend that I know how that works. Alright, let me strip these back and I'll set up something where I can power this up testing wise, and we'll go over to the bike and we'll try it out real quick and see, you know, see if it makes any difference, which like I said, I'm pretty sure it's not going to, but hey, what the hell, might as well give it a shot. I just did a couple of buck connectors, hook them back up to their appropriate wires. Yeah, you know, there is a spark potential here, of course, just a minor one on this side of it, but you know, I'm not spraying gas everywhere, and this is a very low pressure pump, so well, I have the fuel back on. Let's see what it does. Well, that's interesting. See how I click back then? So this kind of gives us an idea of how this thing actually works, in a way, by looking at it with the top open and it functioning. So let's see if we can try that again. So it goes down, and now apparently it's in pressure mode, but we turn the power off, and there's enough pressure on there to keep it from releasing. So right now you have the appropriate amount of back pressure because the float valves are closed, you know, because the carb bowls are full. So that's pretty interesting how that works. Then it would fall back. So, you know, I'm beginning to suspect that might be actually an electrical problem with these contacts. Like, you know, because again, when I was wrapping that thing yesterday, you could make it turn on and off and it would just start flipping out basically. And I'm wondering if that was right here in these contacts, not making good contact, high resistance, and so it couldn't essentially stay latched. So if it couldn't stay latched, naturally it would bounce off, but this thing would be pushing this mechanism back into a position where it's supposed to pump, because it was pumping, the thing was running. So now naturally it was hot too, you know, warm from the area of the engine, but it was also hot in the very top here where the electrical connections are. So I'm thinking that maybe the pump part of this pump isn't a problem at all, and this is exclusively this issue with you know, these contacts right here. because right now it seems to be working just fine. See if we can blow ourselves up. I had the kill switch off. Kill switch engaged. Watch what it does. Yeah, okay. Well, you see you have a little bit of a spark coming off of that, and I suspect that that is, I don't know if that's normal or not. You see, I was really concerned about the output on that fuel cutoff, being that the voltage was below 10 volts or something, but I couldn't really figure out why a pump that's a 12-volt pump would be fired off with only 8 or 9 or 10 volts with the engine running. But you know, if there was a separate control circuit on something like this, I could see that. But this is getting your pump power and the switching power from the same two wires. So, you know, naturally when you have a disconnection like that, unless you have a capacitor, like a you know, a capacitor in an ignition system in old points, which is actually the condenser, you know, points and condenser, which is really just a capacitor. You know, it'll do this. So I'm not too worried about that, but you know, this thing definitely works now. And I bet you it was a contact issue right there. I drained off the fuel and cleaned up, make sure there's no fuel laying around here. I'm going to fire it up again and see, make sure that it still works. See, look at that. So it appears to be working fine. So we're going to go ahead and put this back together, clean up the wiring. These wires are very difficult to reach, so I'm going to extend these a little bit. I just reused the plug. I didn't damage it at all. Couldn't get the pins out anyway. If I could, I'd repin them out just for shits and giggles, but yeah, we'll just reuse it like that. So stand by. I was able to get these out finally. Oh my god, these are super freaking in there. This is how these work. There's a tang on the back side of them. It's rather flat right now because I finally got a little screwdriver in and bent that tang back. Here's a brand new one. You can see that tang is fairly extended out or proud of the above the surface there. And that's what captures the little feature inside these plugs to retain it. There's like a little piece of the plastic molded in there that jives with this particular piece. Now these look like the exact same ones. I thought I had the proper ones. I don't have many of these. They're typically used in the multi-pin applications, like on displays and dashboards of the bike and things like that. I have to order some more, but I need 2 females, so just set these aside. I don't have any, what is it, black with a blue, but I do have some black with a brown, close enough. This is only going to go one way anyway, so as long as that wire is extended to the appropriate side of this plug, then not going to matter anyway. Alright, I'm going to get that ready. Now what I'm going to do is verify which side this goes in, and I'll show you how we crimp these with a special crimping tool and then snap them in, and then they'll be where they need to be for being plugged into the other side of the plug. On this one, the, what is it, the black with a blue wire goes to the left side of this feature, which is the little clip. That's how I generally clock these things, is take a look at the plug. And if you're making a drawing, you need to note which side you're looking at it from. Like for example, right now we're looking at it from the back side of the plug where the wires would penetrate. If you're making a drawing from this side of the plug, you have to note that is, like for example, from the front side of the plug, it's the right one. And in this case, from the back side of the plug, it's the left one. And we'll just make a little mark there for the hell of it. Sometimes I have to make a little drawing if I take something apart that doesn't necessarily get too well referenced in photos. And I like to make little schematics. And when I do that, it tends to guide me in the right direction better than just a photograph does. So that's what I'll do. I'll say from the rear of the plug with the tang up, such and such wire is on the left. Or if there's 9 or 10 or 12 wires, you know, it's just documented out that way. And then you can put it back together correctly. Especially See, these plugs don't always go into other plugs that have the same wire colors on the other side. A lot of times, I'd say the vast majority of the times they do on motorcycles like this, the vintage and antique motorcycles in particular. But I have run into situations, even on these old birds, where you put a plug into another plug and look at the wires on both sides and they change color at that plug. So you can't always go off of that, so it's always good to document that. Alright, how you do this is, I'll show you the crimper here in a minute, but you cut the wire length basically to match the middle feature of this. You see that there's two separate bendy tangs here that crimp over. This is the connection side and this is the restraint. So this center one is actually making the electrical connection. This back one is the restraint. So if you put this so long that the insulation is sticking outside that back tang, you don't get the restraint. You actually want the insulation of the wire in that particular part of it. You see, kind of like that. All right, so you just kind of line it up that way. And as far as length goes, you just kind of judge the length of you need it based on where the contact point is inside the the crimp connector itself. This is the crimp tool that comes with this kit from vintageelectricalconnections.com, and you can experiment a little bit, but I just know which one to put it in. It says a 16 to 14. That's actually a little bit big, and I'll show you why in a minute. What you do is you put this so it's not too far in, because if it's too far in, then it'll actually damage the actual part of the pin, right? And there's a step and a shoulder in here that you can put this restraint feature on, which is kind of, you see that little variance in the thickness of it? I don't know if you can see that or not on camera. So it goes in this way, and you see that sits up against that. So I'm kind of pulling gently against it, and it has a ratchet, so it locks it in place. And then what we're going to do is shove this in. Shove it until it gives a little pokey. Crimp. Now that isn't quite done yet. This crimper, again, that particular die is not really the exact right size for it. You see the center ones, the inside one is pretty good. That inside one is the actual electrical connection, but this restraint isn't. So what I do is I move down to the next die, and I don't go completely, He-Man on this. I just do a certain amount here, and then I just release it. They'll tend to stick when they're in a smaller die, and then you end up getting a nice crimp. So that ain't going nowhere. Okay, I'll just do the other one and we'll shove them in. But this one is well, I'll shove it in now. Shove it. This one, of course, is the power one that we marked for the left side here. And really all you do is shove them in. And if they're a little bent up, just kind of bend them. Sometimes crimping them bends them. And then it'll lock in. You hear that click or feel it. And that one's good. So I'll just do the other one and then we'll solder it up and get done here. Now if you make a mistake like I just did, I didn't put the covering on the wire, it's not going to fit over the connector, but it will over the terminals. These are new terminals, so they're easy to get in and out. I just shoved the tool back in, shove it, and then give it a little twist, which pushes that down. And then we should be able to get these. I got the other one out pretty easy. Sometimes you got to push it against the end of the connector to get it to release from its little spot, and then it comes right out. So what you have to do at that point is you have to rebend this little tang out and kind of reset it for reinstallation. And so you just take a little pick tool or something and bend that up, and then you can reuse these. So I wanted to put a piece of loom, plastic, protector insulation over it, but I forgot. Now it's ready. No harm, no foul. So we'll solder them up first, and then we'll put the protector over, and then we'll put the connector on. So, dumbass. Like a Cheech and Chong movie. You older guys will get that. I like that. Alright, now again, this one we picked a brown with a black with a brown. is the power one that goes on the left there. I made the little mark. So we'll shove them back in because I rebended the tangs. It's only going to go one way. It goes into the plug, by the way. There's a little slot for it to fit right there. So it's only going to go one way. Guess we'll put this condom back on since that's how it mounts. Now this is important because how this thing fits in the little tabs here puts the inlet, well actually it goes this way, puts the inlet to the left and the outlet to the right, and that's where my fuel lines are already oriented, so it's kind of important we do that correctly. And this thing, this slot right here, is our guide for that because it is the clearance for this little vent dealio, whatever it's for. I don't know. All right, all back in, and I like it with a longer wire. I mean, this was really a pain in the ass to reach that plug up in there. So now that it's longer, it can kind of fall down closer to the jug, so I'll just wire tie that up in there at a later time. But she's all mounted, the fuel lines reattached, and I got the fuel on. Well, that was a big fail. Alright, so this is what I did. I did install the aftermarket, and it works fine. It's already pressurized up, so right now the ignition's on, it's ready to run. And so I already tested it, everything's fine, no leaks, no nothing. I made two slight modifications to it. I didn't like this blue, jump out at me loom on it, so I put the black stuff on there. And the connector that came off of it was broken, had a little tang. I don't know where it went here, but the little tang on it was busted off where it clips into the wire, so I just depinned it as I showed you earlier, and then used the OEM pin because it's the same OEM plug rather because it's the same pins. And so yeah, this is all fixed now for good. Now I don't like this little tang that sticks out of here either. This is that little vent thing. I don't know if I can clock this thing around too much because of the way the fuel lines are. No. So I don't know, I'll put hose on it. Maybe I can find a piece of molded tubing that goes straight down or something. I don't know. Or just leave it. I don't care. So basically, it should be just fine this way. It runs, it pumps, it pulses when it's running, so it's keeping up with the carbs, in other words. So, hey, you know what? Best laid plans don't often work. So, hey, this is how it is when you're doing repairs and restorations. The other thing I did was, before I put this aftermarket pump in, I took the OEM pump and just let it hang down, and with it plugged in, turned it on, and of course it actuated. And then, put my finger over the inlet, and it was definitely sucking. You could feel a vacuum on it. Put it on the outlet, and it kept running. And I'm like, well, maybe that's the way it's supposed to work. There's no fluid in it. It isn't an air pump after all. But when I did that with this pump, off the bike again before I installed it, it immediately shut down when I clamped off that outlet. So that was really a bona fide and 100% positive test that this OEM fuel pump has definitely taken a shit. The other thing I did was I wanted to verify that there was no fuel delivery issue. Like, I did clean this fuel system out best I could, but, the fuel filter's inside there. And so maybe it got clogged, but that's flowing fuel fine. And I verified that up to the carbs, that's free as well. So how you do that essentially is if the carbs are full, this is any bike, if carbs are full, you're not going to be able to push against that anymore because the floats are closed. So I just ran it without any fuel pump or any fuel delivery hooked up to it till the carb float bowls dropped down a little bit. Then just with gentle air, not compressed air, just with, blowing into it, it was free to move. So there's no problem. There's no problem with fuel going upstream or coming in from the source. This is a really kind of a wacky setup. The way it works is because you have the main tank and the sub tank. The main tank feeds the sub tank, and I think I mentioned that in other videos. But inside the sub tank, there is a series of metal lines originating from a screen pickup on the bottom of the sub tank. It comes up to the side of the tank where there's two holes for the fuel cock. Fuel cock is not an integral part of the fuel tank like they are in other bikes. It's essentially a surface mount job, and it just articulates with the two holes that are plumbed in, with those lines, one being the suction side, one being the discharge side, and then that just switches that on and off, and there's a gasket you have to get, which actually looks like a Mickey Mouse thing with the 3 circles, that seals that off, and then you just screw it on off. It's really easy to change the fuel cock on this. The problem with it, of course, or the challenge for a fuel pump that's either weak or failing, is you have to pull a vacuum on from the bottom of that sub tank up through that line and into the fuel cock, through the fuel cock, and then there's another metal line that goes down to the bottom of the sub tank and penetrates it. That's where the discharge is, which comes up to your fuel pump. The fuel pump then goes up to the carbs through that circuit. So it is kind of a wonky setup compared to like my Magna. It's much simpler. And although it has a fuel pump and a sub tank as well, it's just a lot simpler. And so basically, again, there's not a direct drain, if you will, on the bottom of that sub tank where you're going to get a whole lot of gravity feeding. Yes, you will get it if you have a full tank gas up here. You're going to have a head pressure coming into the sub tank. But let's say you didn't. Let's say it was only the sub tank that had gas in it because this was empty. You'd have only a certain amount of head pressure there. And again, you have to draw up through those lines and then push it down through a filter and all the way up to here. So that really is pretty telling as to why it's not going to work right when you don't have a good fuel pump. Well, this here little video is just supposed to be about, taking a look at the fuel pump itself and seeing how it worked. But when I saw that contact in there and decided to give it a cleaning, and it seemed to work after that, I figured, hey man, look at this, man, I fixed this thing. Doesn't always work that way though, doesn't it? So, hey, you know what? I'd rather screw up and show you what not to do or why these things are screwing up or failing than just say, do it this way and that's it. Remember, I screw up, so you don't have to. Yeah, I put this at the beginning of the video, and I will reiterate it. This is not necessarily how to do something. This is how I just did it. So if you're going to start taking fuel pumps apart and you're going to start working with gasoline and things like that, you do so at your own risk. So keep that in mind. I've done this a long time, so I kind of know the safety things to take into consideration. But again, you're on your own on this one when you're dealing with fuel pumps, electrical, and gasoline. So take that to the bank. Speaking of the bank, it's not open today, but that's another matter. I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel. You can bank on that being a mechanism in which you can get notified if I put another video up, along with ringing the bell. Like the video if you like what you saw. We learned a couple things with it, at least, as far as crimping wires and doing some stuff like that. I should say depinning or pin removal with a little bit of frustration there, which is actually not difficult at all usually. These are kind of extreme pins. So don't be an extreme pin head. Make sure that you do those things, and always remember, don't just repair, restore. Catch you on the next video.